What would happen if Lord Vader was trained by Darth Nihilus instead of Darth Sidious? Greetings again, Acolytes, and welcome to the Archives. What's fascinating about Vader, it's a fair thing to say that he was somewhat shirked of this true Sith training. Palpatine had promised him all the secrets, and he didn't exactly deliver on this promise. During the Age of the Empire, Sidious's idea of training was sending Vader on missions that challenged both his abilities mentally as well as his emotional resolve. And while he offered Vader books to read, scrolls, and holocrons, Vader didn't exactly take to this idea of quiet study. Vader cared far more for action, and as a result, his Sith training was a bit more middling. But what would happen if Vader's training was taken over by someone else? Someone willing to teach him a thing or two about the dark side in a more hands-on, devastating fashion? What if there was a more ancient Sith that were to rise from the grave, slay Sidious, and take over the position of the Dark Lord and master of Darth Vader? What if such a Sith were none other than the Lord of Hunger, Darth Nihilus? Well, in today's holocron, we are going to explore a hypothetical scenario in which Vader trains other Nihilus after getting his suit. But this won't be much of a narrative fanfiction. This will be an analysis of the effect that someone like Nihilus would have on someone like Vader. So with that said, if you enjoyed this style of video and want to see more, then be sure to drop a comment down below of what other scenarios you would like us to analyze. But now, let's begin. What would happen if Darth Vader was trained by Darth Nihilus? While the narrative aspect is not as important to us today, we will provide some setup to how this could occur. Nihilus was never exactly said to be destroyed. His mask contained his essence, and although he was defeated, there was a lingering feeling that he would one day return. He was a walking wound in the Force, and it's hard to believe that he was defeated through simple combat. In this new timeline, Sidious has found the mask of Nihilus, and has decided to add it to his collection of artifacts. The collection was originally located in the Works District in Coruscant, but was moved to be stored beneath the medical facility that was transforming Anakin into Vader. It is said in the lore that this collection of artifacts contained such a concentrated amount of power that it created a dark side nexus right beneath the medical facility. And when Anakin was brought back from his defeat on Mustafar, Palpatine would draw upon this very same nexus to keep his new apprentice alive, using it to transform him and move him into his black suit of armor. In this timeline, however, Palpatine's ritual has an adverse effect. Both him drawing upon the nexus created by the artifacts, combined with the profound suffering of Anakin, would awaken the mask of Nihilus. Anakin, having lost his limbs, burnt to nothingness, put in a prison of a cybernetic body, and freshly learning that his wife has died at his own hand, releases a wave of anguish in the Force. The disturbance, one large enough with pain and agony to breathe life back into the mask. The shadows bent and stretched around it in a heinous worship, swirling towards the epicenter of evil. The mask floated upward and situated itself within the vortex of darkness, and before long, hands and feet would take shape, as did a strange horned head shrouded by a cloak black as night. Nihilus lives again. Palpatine immediately senses the disturbance and is distracted from his victory. Vader senses it too, but he is wrapped in emotion and pain. All he feels is anger and anguish towards Palpatine, how he failed to save his wife as the Dark Lord had promised. He lied, and now Vader has nothing except the darkness itself. The ultimate irony was that he chased the power to save the one that he loved no matter the cost, not even realizing that the cost was her life. This sorrow, this hatred, draws Nihilus to the operating room. He melts out of the shadows like a wraith and appraises the new Sith of this era. Sidious is terrified and unleashes a torrent of force lightning at the apparition, but Nihilus catches the storm with one hand and begins to consume it, feeding himself after having been asleep for so long. But behind Sidious, Vader takes his chance for revenge, reaches out while his master is distracted. Using the Force, Vader takes Sidious by the throat in a blind fury. The Emperor thrashes around, his lightning searing Anakin through his armor, but his rage keeps him from succumbing to the pain. Vader pauses, but only for a moment. Was this truly the man that he was prepared to kill? He hated Palpatine for what he had made him do, what he had made him become, but now, Palpatine was all he had left, and if he killed him, he would have nothing. But suddenly a voice enters his mind, in a horrid, in a vile tone, the feeling as if the Force is nails on a chalkboard. But the voice tells him exactly what he needs to hear. Do it. With a sickening crack, Vader snaps Palpatine's neck, ending the life of the galaxies and Anakin's greatest tormentor. He then looks to a new master, the one who issued the command, Nihilus, just as he did to his former apprentice Visas Mar, would reach out with his presence, would touch the mind of Vader. He would instantly learn what Anakin had been through, who he was, all the power that he had locked away within himself. He would force Vader to confront the fact that he was now completely alone, totally hopeless. The Jedi had failed him, his wife and best friend betrayed him, Palpatine had used him. Even the Force itself seemed to be playing a cruel joke on Anakin, calling him the Chosen One. The only thing fitting for a galaxy such as this was annihilation. All life must be eradicated. Only then would he have peace. From Nihilus's perspective, it was befitting of all life to be cleansed of living. The purpose of life itself was death, and with his presence he often convinced others of his way of thinking. Nihilus did so with Visas Mar, showing her how all of the beings in the galaxy scurried about while completely disconnected from the Force. They weren't able to hear, understand its currents. As one from the Miraluka species, Visas Mar was born without eyes and had to see using the Force exclusively. Her people connected to the Force and was using it as one of their main senses, meaning it was incredibly meaningful to them. So when she truly experienced how every other being in the galaxy was living disconnected, she came to believe that this was an abomination. This, combined with the painful and despair-inducing presence of Nihilus, swayed her to this belief, and that all life should be annihilated. For Vader, he would be in a high emotional state after having coming to terms with what he had done. Nihilus was like a black hole in the Force, drawing in all of Vader's willpower, literally chewing away at his sanity. Succumbing to hopelessness, Vader understands the wordless message that Nihilus is conveying. His armor, smoking from Palpatine's lightning, he falls to one knee despite it paining his body to do so. And Vader accepts the teachings of nothingness, pledges himself to whatever the Lord of Hunger will desire to teach. So what happens next? How would Nihilus train Vader? I think the first thing we have to address would be Vader's physicality. With his body now destroyed, he has to rely on cybernetics that limit his movement and ability to use and tap into the Force. He still has to completely retool his lightsaber form and deal with the fact that he was cut down from his once profound potential. However, in Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Palpatine formed the idea that Vader's limitations were purely psychological. He thought that Vader could regain his power if he were to be able to move past the limits of his mind. And while Sidious failed in any way to make this happen, perhaps Nihilus could succeed in this area. Let's examine it. But Nihilus has experience here. One of his Sith contemporaries, Darth Sion of the Sith Triumvirate, was known as the Lord of Pain. Sion was able to use the pain of his injuries to fuel his body and his power. Using this power, he held his body together and kept fighting as an undead zombie. Perhaps Sion would have been a better teacher for Vader in this aspect. But Nihilus is undeterred. He believes that he can take inspiration from his old friend and teach Vader a couple new tricks. Nihilus himself is an apparition, his body consumed by his own hunger years ago. He knows the feeling of sustaining one's form off of the Force, and to bypass his physical limitations, Nihilus would teach Vader Force Drain. The philosophy he uses as a teaching tool is that the Force has already taken so much from Anakin's life, so it was time for him to take something back from it. Vader would undoubtedly agree, now feeling used and provoked by the Force itself. First practicing on stormtroopers and workers, Vader would gradually learn how to draw out their essence and transform it into dark healing for his own body. Little by little, he would be able to mend the wounds of his organs, his flesh, using the lives and the suffering of others. Under Nihilus's tutelage, Vader's first few missions would see him hunting Jedi like before, but whenever he defeated them with the lightsaber, he wouldn't just hack them down. Instead, he would reach out, consume their essence, use it to heal himself. I don't imagine this is a process that Vader would enjoy. Nihilus himself hated it when he first attempted consuming life force energy, but as vile and uncomfortable as this process was, Vader and Nihilus would see it as a necessary evil. Vader may enjoy running Jedi through with his lightsaber much better, but at least their life force can be used to give him back what he lost, what was stripped from him. It would take time, because it required a lot of Jedi to heal what had been done. But not only this, he would have to share with his new master. Nihilus, of course, would get first dibs on any Jedi, and because of the accursed Order 66, Nihilus would realize that there was a distinct lack of Jedi to be found in the galaxy to feed upon. This would become an issue quickly. He needed to feed his insatiable hunger. This is his only goal. Vader didn't much like sharing either though, but Nihilus was too powerful to resist, and he was growing stronger every day. even stronger than perhaps Sidious had been. Before long, Vader is able to heal his organs enough to breathe on his own and to have the apparatus removed. He still requires his suit of armor and a helmet for some things, but this is all less of a burden. Under the tutelage of Nihilus's ancient knowledge, Vader can use his anger and his hatred to knit his flesh back together. In Legends, Vader has actually attempted to do this before. In his Bacta tank, he managed to heal his lungs enough to breathe on his own. The Dark Lord once accomplished this through concentration on the unfairness of his situation and a longing for Padme. When he was finally able to breathe again though, the Dark Lord was so elated at the feeling that he lost concentration, and the healing was instantly reversed. Vader then decided that the dark side healing was unsustainable because joy poisoned the dark side's power. But in this brand new scenario with Nihilus, Vader has embraced hopelessness. No joy or pleasure would ever grace him again, and the Dark Lord's healing can now be sustained. And of course, he wasn't just using his own power, but now the life force of others, and the mending of his body is more and more complete by the day. The more he feeds, the more he begins to see life and others as nothing more than livestock. Nihilus would train Vader to tap into the truest dark side nature in a way that Palpatine had never done. Sidious had always told Vader to get rid of his grief, to grow beyond it. But Nihilus would teach him to use his grief. He taught him to embrace the fact that destiny had cheated him, teaching him that his new lot in life is revenge on the universe itself. Harnessing his rage, giving into his darkness, his innermost inclinations would make Vader more cruel, more terrifying than ever before. Force Drain would replace Force Choke as his favorite ability, and anytime an officer stepped out of line or failed their mission, their life would become his nourishment. Vader would eventually heal his body to such an extent that he was able to cast aside his cybernetics, besides of course those supporting his arms and legs. He would likely keep wearing the armor and the mask however, simply because of how much fear it struck into those around him. Fear was good, fear fed him, and soon his body would be nearly completely healed, his potential once again now in sight. Now having attained this means by which to grasp it, Vader would train even more fervently to begin to grow and wield more and more power. I don't believe that Vader would ever be able to manipulate lightning. Even Sidious said that because of his cybernetics, the ability would be beyond him, but that didn't stop him from being able to use other abilities that he didn't have previously. His telekinesis was already incredibly destructive, and he would start to observe Starkiller level feats, performing them without much effort. Any planet that he wanted to conquer would be his to do so, though of course he would always have to surrender most of its life to his master Nihilus. At this point, he'd been able to manifest powers such as Dark Blast, enabling him to conjure, project waves of pure darkside energy. In the main timeline, Jedi were already not much of an issue for Vader, but here, Jedi are completely a joke to him. Vader would still use his lightsaber, but only because of his enjoyment of lightsaber combat. It was purely for pleasure most of the time, but now his gifts in the Force could atomize any target that he wished. However, he was still always one step behind Nihilus intentionally. With how well Vader was conquering worlds now, Nihilus would venture to all of these worlds, consume the life force from their surfaces, rendering them stormy wastelands. Nihilus has likely also consumed the life of the entire Senate by now, setting himself as the new emperor only by default. The galaxy is gripped by fear, unable to appease their new rulers, except for when he found a planet sufficiently rich in the Force for his dinner. He would have no need for a Death Star. He would shut down all production of it. All a planet-busting machine like that would do would be wasting a perfectly good meal. But this is where Vader would begin to reevaluate his relationship with his new master. We believe that Vader would begin to view his master Nihilus as a problem. For a long time, he had been content with consuming the scraps that Nihilus had left behind, being satisfied with his new power and healing. But now that his body was nearly completely healed and was rapidly accelerating in his own power, Vader would feel as though it was time to take what was owed to him, to become the chosen one, to destroy the Sith. Despite the despair and the nihilism that he was filled with, Vader would never permanently trade one master for another. We also believe that Vader wouldn't actually want all life to be destroyed. He was angry at the universe, yes, but he wanted to rule, to make the galaxy his, just as he wanted to do with Padme. He did not want to burn it to ash, and with his newfound power, Vader believed that he would finally be able to find a way to resurrect Padme. He couldn't do that if Nihilus was still around though, destroying everything like a crazed apparition. But make no mistake, the power of Nihilus is a problem. Years of serving by his side, providing him with the planets to eat, has caused Vader to inadvertently feed his strength to maximum levels. Nihilus has gotten to the point of draining surfaces and entire worlds again if he desires, and Vader was starting to notice that even this wasn't fully slacking his thirst anymore. How much longer before he began to consume entire star systems? Vader had to act quickly to overthrow him, but was he strong enough to do it? He would have to find out. Vader was confident in his power now, but he would not make the same mistake that he had on Mustafar. He would have to go into this rationally, use everything he was taught, and more. But now that he had his body back, there was a lot less that could be used against him. This would be the toughest challenge of his life, but unlike what many believe, it was not impossible to defeat Nihilus. Back in Nihilus's day, he had formed a force bond with Visas Mar which was used against him, using her to suppress his immense power, thus allowing Mitra Surik to defeat Nihilus one-on-one. But in this circumstance, Vader would have no need to suppress his power. They were mostly on equal footing since they were both able to break limits. And while Nihilus could drain the surface of a planet with his power, he could not do that against a Force sensitive who was aware of him. In Knights of the Old Republic 2, it's revealed that Force sensitives can resist him if they're aware of what he's doing. And even when Nihilus was at the peak of his power, one can be trained to resist this, exactly how Mitra Surik did when she defeated him. After years of being in Nihilus's service, Vader would have been in the presence of him countless times, and by this point, the aura of despair would no longer affect him as strongly as it once had. Vader has kept the Dark Lord from chewing away at his mind until he has learned to resist the maddening effects of his presence. It wouldn't be too difficult for him to figure out how to shield against Force drain, especially since he himself was familiar with that power. But Vader would still need to be cunning. He would wait for a time after the last time Nihilus fed. And what many fail to realize is that Nihilus's power is fully dependent on his hunger. When Nihilus is freshly fed, his power is at its apex, but the hungrier he gets, the more the hunger consumes his own power, making him weaker until he does eventually feed again. Knowing this though, Vader would wait for the opportune moment until Nihilus's godlike power was dropped to a manageable level. And with Jedi and Force-rich planets now a rarity, it was up to Vader to find worlds that were suitable for his master's hunger, and with this knowledge, Vader would set his trap. When Nihilus was alive, he traveled around in his zombie ship, the Ravager. I'd assumed that he would commandeer a Star Destroyer and use it as his personal carriage for his time as the Emperor. Unlike Palpatine, Nihilus is always on the move, looking for new worlds to consume. And so this is where and when Vader would lure him out into the unknown regions, far away from the Imperial fleet. And with a false lead on a Force-rich world, Nihilus would follow as a moth to the flame. But then, he would arrive at the coordinates to see nothing but empty space. No planet, no nothing. Confused, he would only begin to understand what was happening when Vader used his fighter to cripple the engines of the Star Destroyer. There was now no escape, and Vader would announce his challenge to his master, single-handedly killing every member of personnel on board the zombie ship. And now, for good measure, Vader would absorb their essence, feed his power in preparation for the ultimate showdown. Vader's ascendance has arrived. Aboard the bridge, Vader steps out with his lightsaber drawn. The audacity of his apprentice's actions impress Nihilus, so he decides to humor him with the battle that he clearly craves, if nothing more than to make him suffer before he consumes his apprentice as well. But Nihilus is not prepared for what Vader has become. Nihilus rarely entered single combat with other beings, and when he did, his overwhelming strength in the Force always knocked them off kilter. But Vader continued to hone, refine his skill at the lightsaber even after gaining new abilities in the Force, and Nihilus is defeated rather handily at the blade. But that was fine, and enough for foolishness. Nihilus throws his hands up, releasing dark energy, and unleashing a torrent of red lightning, the crackling energy searing nearly every surface of the bridge. And while Vader cannot use lightning, he can use to menace, and Nihilus himself taught Vader how to expertly eat energy. And so to Nihilus's absolute terror, that is exactly what Vader does. Taking methodical steps forward, the Dark Lord pushes against the red lightning, consuming it into his own body, gathering more power and energy. Nihilus is given visions of when he first met Vader. He was doing the exact same thing to Sidious. Realizing the danger that he was in, Nihilus puts more energy into his lightning, attempting to sneakily consume Vader's essence, making him weaker. But all of his tricks are to no avail. Vader is aware of what he is doing, and he is already actively resisting him. Vader unleashes a blast of his own, neutralizing the storm of energy and nearly shattering the transparisteel viewport of the ship. Nihilus is now the one blasted back against the helm of the bridge. Consoles, electronics, and debris rip themselves from the bridge's floor and ceiling as Nihilus conjures a force maelstrom. Vader, though, marches forward undeterred, summoning his lightsaber back to his grasp. Nihilus attacks him relentlessly with whirlwinds of objects. Vader slices and bats each one aside, but begins to become overwhelmed as more debris is thrown at him from all angles. His rage mounting, Vader screams out, unleashing a force repulse that renders every object in his vicinity dust. Nihilus holds both hands forwards and once again attempts to consume his life essence, putting everything into this final ability. Vader's advance slows as he attempts to resist the all-consuming power of the Dark Lord Nihilus. But his energy is not limitless, and it begins to fail. His armor begins to crack, his clothes begin to shred as they're pulled towards the event horizon of Nihilus's outstretched palms. Vader knows it is now or never. He fights his way forward even as his skin begins to flake and peel. He feels his strength failing, but he reinforces them with the dark side's power. After everything that it has taken from him, Vader will not fall here. This single thought gives him the boost that he needs to reach his arms forward, to cleave down his fiery blade at the black apparition of his master. And with a sudden explosion of power, Nihilus is no more. This time, Vader crushes his mask underfoot, ending his presence forever. Vader is victorious. What would happen following this is difficult to say, but this is where we turn it to you. Luke would need to be trained soon enough by Obi-Wan and Yoda, and without the Death Star's mission, it's likely that he would not meet Han Solo, but would rather meet Leia by joining the Alliance directly, this time as a fully fledged Jedi Knight. But the question is Vader too far gone in the ways of nihilism and cruelty to ever be reached by his son? Or will the light side once again prove to poison the powers of the dark side, to bring Anakin back to the surface? If Anakin is even there at all, if Anakin himself has not been fully consumed, if there's anything human left in Vader at all. But that is the question I pose to you, my friends. And what do you think would have happened if Nihilus had been the one to train Lord Vader? What are your thoughts on this force of nature, tapping into the power of the Chosen One, teaching Vader to consume entire worlds? But as always, my friends, thank you guys so much for stopping by the channel and the archives today. Your viewership means the absolute world to us, and may the Force be with you.